Okay, we're going live. Let's pull it up on here. Okay, awesome. We are good. So I've got Bobbie here with me today. We're going to talk about all things genetic testing. I know we've got a couple minutes until noon, but we wanted to jump on here and make sure everything's ready to go. Let me pull it up in on my phone real quick and make sure that everything looks good. Yep.
Sounds
Okay,
good.
so I'll be able to check for comments if anyone wants to jump on and ask questions. We've got Bobbie Spencer. Did you want to introduce yourself? Because I feel like you've got a lot in your background and you know more than I do. I know a little bit, but
Yeah, sure. So Bobbie, I've known Rebecca for many years. I had the pleasure of working with her many moons ago before genetic testing took over my life. Um,
it did take over your life.
it has. It absolutely has. I think it's 8 years later now that it's been part of my day to day. So I am a holistic health practitioner, functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner, dietary supplements, but the whole nine yards. I basically focus a lot on functional nutrition. What I do for the company that I work for, MaxGen Labs, is I work specifically with practitioners, new accounts, getting them up and running, integrating testing for their clients and for their patients. So day to day, I'm working with hundreds of practitioners, helping plug them into resources and training so that way they can utilize the testing ultimately the most efficiently for not only themselves but for their clients and their patients across the board. So,
And I'm curious, like, what started this path with genetic testing? I don't remember how you got connected to all this.
so that's actually a fun story. I'll break that down. So I actually just did a video testimonial on how this all came to be for the company. That's actually on our, I think they put that on our YouTube just recently. So I actually had to sit on camera and discuss why I came to not only the company but utilizing genetic testing. So our youngest son was diagnosed with autism when he was 4. He had a lot of health issues, a lot of things that just weren't adding up. Over the course of about a year, we saw about 12 different specialists, all allopathic, nobody really functional, running tons of labs, tons of tests, but not really giving us an answer as to what was going on with him. And in this process that we were dealing with him, he was also losing language skills. Like he went from being somewhat verbal
So
to,
he was regressing
yes,
speech.
big time, big
Yeah.
time. He was regressing. His immune system was shot. Um, we can infer certain things within that time frame, but I'll keep it PG. For purposes of being on Facebook and whatnot. Happy to talk about it privately with anybody. So what had happened was that somebody told me about this genetic test, and at that point, I was down at the bottom of the barrel. We didn't know what else to do. None of the doctors were validating any of my questions at that point. And I said, okay, if I don't have to pin him down to do any more blood work, then I may consider it. And it was just an easy cheek swab. So I was like, cool, this is easy. We don't have to fight with him.
Finally, an easy kid-friendly test.
Something easy, something simple. And I was like, fantastic. This was just something that
Oh,
we did first thing in the morning. Super simple. So we sent that off, and back then, many, many years ago, it took about 4 weeks or so before we got the results back. So in the meantime, we're still just kind of piling through any labs that were outstanding. He was not doing well. So I was just kind of at bottom of the barrel. And in all of that, once I did get the report back, I spent probably 3 to 4 days poring over all of his labs, the genetic test in front of me. I was pulling up research. Like I really went into a deep dive for about 72 hours. My poor husband was like, hey, you got to come up for air. You're not going to solve everything this week. And I was like, I think I did solve it though. Like I said, it's sitting right here in front of us. Basically, the poor kid had a trifecta of genetic tendencies that allowed for increased inflammation. He couldn't detox properly. He needed tons of folate and B12 support. He needed phosphatidylcholine. There were so many things that seemed so simple that were completely looked over by the medical community as a whole at that point. So after many hours of being in tears and frustrated and angry, we completely revamped what we were doing for him. So that meant healing up his gut. That meant supporting, pathways that we never thought to support before, other than, hey, here's a gummy vitamin, take this because it's got all the good stuff.
Yeah, here's a multi.
Yeah, so we went very very basic with him and started very slow and steady, and just supporting those different processes. And thankfully, I think we were in a position that not only that I had enough knowledge in the functional space, I had a ton of friends and colleagues that were also feeding me information and giving me resources to really push this through for him. So I think our experience utilizing the genetics really ended up being almost like a fast forward for him, whereas others may have taken a longer journey from where
It
we were
sounds like a
at.
complete, like, pivotal turning point.
It was huge. It was absolutely huge because in about, I would say, 4 to 5 months, kind of integrating these protocols and changes for him, it was like night and day. Like he started having a conversation with us again. Like we could understand the words coming out of his mouth. And at first, I'm just like, oh, it's just a fluke. It's not a big deal. Like, it'll come and go. But it never stopped. And he just progressively kept getting better. And I stopped for a moment and was like, okay, the only changes we made were in alignment of knowing those biomarkers and where those levels were, piecing them together with the genetics that we had on the report and fully supporting it. So that literally meant he had to change his entire diet. He had to go 100% gluten free. We had to take dairy completely out of his diet. And that's really hard for a 5, 6 year old sensory driven autistic kiddo who loves chicken nuggets and goldfish crackers. Like that was the only thing we could get into him at one point. But
It's funny, I feel like it's similar foods.
across the board, yeah.
Yeah. What's in the chicken nuggets?
I
Like,
think it's some kind of addiction. I don't know, but it's chicken nuggets, French fries,
it's
goldfish
so
crackers.
funny.
I mean, he still liked like apples and bananas and things like that, but we learned very quickly in order to get a lot of these supplements in him. I would say for probably the first 6 months, the kid ate smoothies like nobody's business because that was the only way that I could really hide most of these ingredients, that he wouldn't taste it and he wouldn't turn his nose up at it. So that was the big thing for him. But 4, 5, 6 months later, like he was thriving. Like he started putting on a little bit of weight. He was sleeping better. His sensory issues, like I wouldn't say they completely disappeared, but they went from like 100% down to like 60%. Like they completely, the trajectory completely changed for him. And just little by little over the years, like kind of utilizing this information. And he does annual blood work every year. Like that's just my one requirement to keep up with him and what he's doing and how he's progressing. And it makes a huge difference because then you know what to adjust and what may need to be added back in, or maybe his vitamin D levels are phenomenal and I don't need to push it as hard because he's outside.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like he'll be 14 in 10 days, 14. And I have seen such a huge change in where we thought he was going to be versus where he's at now. And I mean, he'll talk your ear off. If anybody wants a history lesson, the kid is a historian through and through. Like he will tell you
He has
anything.
no problem talking now.
No, none. And he'll talk your ear off. We still struggle with some things with him, health wise, but I think it ebbs and flows. And I think that's true for anybody, on a health journey. Things are always going to ebb and flow. There's going to be a roller
For
coaster,
sure.
but he's got the components and the support in place now that he knows to take his digestive enzymes. He knows he needs to take, certain vitamins on certain times of the day. He knows when he starts not feeling good. That's when the immune system support bucket comes out. And
Yeah.
he's got to take extra vitamin C and all
Just
of
like anyone else. Yeah.
yeah, so if you teach them young enough and you make this part of their system, especially with the younger that you can start, the better. As they get older, they know the things that they need to support. Like he's very body aware now. He knows when he eats too much gluten, and everything in moderation. He is sensitive to gluten, but I also don't restrict him to the point at being a teenager. He's got friends that are not as strict with dietary needs. So he knows if he goes to a friend's house and he eats cupcake that's not gluten free, he better make sure he takes his enzymes to break all of that down. So it's been
Mhm.
a great journey. It was a hard one, but that basically catapulted me into working for the company. After about, I would say we did the test, and about a year later, they pulled me in and wanted me to work for them, and here I am. Long story short.
Awesome. I I love it. Thank you for sharing all of that. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
absolutely.
I know we wanted to talk about genetics and,
Yeah.
there's so many assumptions around it. I think there's for still, even though like epigenetics has been around for forever now, people still are afraid of genetic testing to some degree because they feel like it's set in stone and, it's going to tell them almost like finding out when you're going to die or something really dramatic like that.
It's like the testing
It's an
that's out there,
extreme
like, let
example,
me
but it
tell you
kind of
your
feels that
biological
way of like,
age.
oh no, what's going to get me the boogeyman? Better to
Yeah,
not know.
yeah,
So if you wouldn't mind just sharing like
yeah.
genetic testing and the point of it and kind of breaking down the differences between family history and genetic testing and
So there's a saying that a lot of people use. It's been passed down by my parents. It's got to be genetics because mom and dad had it, or my grandparents or my aunt or my uncle. It's all genetic. That's not necessarily the case when you start breaking things down. So there's two different camps of types of genetics that you can kind of focus on and talk about. You have like your diagnostic type genetics, which are medical diagnoses. So that's looking at things like the BRCA gene, or like a major genetic disease
like
that,
a clotting
yeah,
disorder or something, like
yeah,
there's
so
certain
there is
genetic.
definitely some validity, for people to be kind of worried about, learning that information. Absolutely. Like my mom's a breast cancer survivor. I get it. Thankfully, we don't carry the BRCA gene. So hers was circumstantial, environmental, lifestyle related. That's how things developed for her. I even, touch on the point of sometimes it's past trauma. Our body holds on to things and things develop from that.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
then you have the genetics that I'm a part of, which is what we consider lifestyle genetics. And it's not necessarily giving somebody a diagnosis. I know all of the rage, for years now is MTHFR. Like I'm diagnosed with MTHFR, I'm this, I'm that. And it's like, great, we're all diagnosed with it because we all have MTHFR as a gene. It's the gene that everybody has. What changes the variables is what variant of that gene does that individual have that might change the support process for it. It doesn't mean that it's going to make or break your life, but it is giving you that bit of information that fills in a puzzle piece that may not have been there before when you're kind of guessing with what do I do next. So,
You said a word that I appreciate because when genetic testing earlier came on the scene, a lot of times people were saying gene mutation.
yeah,
And I've really appreciated as an industry, the genetic testing industry, kind of changing their language around mutation to more of a gene variance and
yeah,
variation. Because to me, it's not that people have broken genetics or weak genetics or whatever. It's to me, in my perspective, I feel like our environment has mutated.
yes,
So we've got these mutating chemical crap in our environment that our genetics are not aligned with. They're not harmonious with these xenoestrogens and plastics and chemicals. And like,
Everything is
you
everywhere.
shouldn't be, like it's not a
Yeah,
bad thing to
yeah,
not be in alignment with those things.
exactly.
So I do feel like people are negative about their own genetics. And I'm like, no, there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with you.
To me,
So
this is
sadly, it's our environment that is wrong.
yeah, our environment, maybe how, our traditional medical community views our health in general is kind of where I think some of the disengagement comes from, and what kind of puts that fear in people. It's like, well, if I know this information, this is going to ruin my life. No, this is going to give you the
Like the
absolute.
Alzheimer's genes are really, really
I could
scary
talk
to
about
people.
APOE till I'm blue in the face, because I'm telling you, that is one of the things that I get so often. It's like, oh, well, I don't want to know that. Well, why not? Alzheimer's can take up to 20, 30 years of progression. Why wouldn't you want to be empowered with the knowledge to be proactive now, to support your body, so that way you can possibly avoid ever, developing the disease on its own. And that's kind of the point that I take to whether my own clients or the practitioners I work with that are really new to integrating genetics. This is being proactive. This is, instead of being reactive, you're using this information to be proactive. It's not meant to scare somebody or stress them out further. It's giving them the empowerment to kind of take control of their lifestyle, their diet, their environment, like cleaning up the toxins. And like the point that you made is, we're inundated with things day to day. We have our kids playing on rubber playgrounds. Rubber playgrounds off gas butadiene, which is an environmental toxin. There are genetics that we have that could make it very difficult for us to detox butadiene out of our system. And we look at that on this test that
Oh,
we.
wow.
So, something very simple that, you let your kids go play at the park, and it's a rubber play, it's made from tires. Those rubber playgrounds are made from tires that are full of chemicals. It's things like that that can empower us with the knowledge of, okay, great, my kids went and played, they can go home, they can shower, maybe rub some, topical glutathione on all over their liver to help them detox, make sure they're sweating, make sure they're hydrated, and help support their body move some of those chemicals out of their system. So
Hmm.
it's one of those things where we don't need to be afraid of our environment, but just having the knowledge alone can really empower you to make healthier choices and being able to sport. Sometimes we look like, we're a little crazy because we're like, no, I'm not going to drink out of that plastic water bottle. I want class. Or, I'm not going to play on that playground. We're going to go over here where the wood chips are. So, there's different scenarios and different camps of what, the term is like, pick your battles. That's
Yes.
essentially what I feel like when you integrate genetics, you're picking your battles. Like, what do you want to focus on? What do you want to piece together with, your own health journey? Where are you at currently? Are you dealing with things that have been chronic for years? Okay, great. Let's take 20 steps back and look at some of the foundational genetics that might have led to some of those symptoms. Or there could be situations where there are genetics completely not related to those symptoms, but because everything is connected, you may need support somewhere else that can reduce symptoms elsewhere. So it's a complicated roller coaster, but it's not something to be feared, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. Let's talk about, because we kind of cleared up why you would want to get genetic testing, even though some people find it to be scary. Like you said, things take years and years and years to play out. So this gives you so much time, the advantage
Yeah,
of knowing before things happen that,
absolutely.
hey, I have this weak link and this spot in my health that probably needs a little bit more attention and effort to age really well. So, like, why not know that sooner than later? That's a really good point. But what you were saying just now is kind of like, to me, it would depend on the type of test you do, genetic wise, and like how to apply it correctly. I think that's where a lot, the people who are willing to do it, maybe they do 23andMe Or maybe they had a practitioner say, "Hey, I can tell you what supplements you really need if
Yeah.
we do genetic testing." Or I hear this a lot. Let's do genetic testing so that we can figure out why you're not losing weight, like get the perfect diet for you. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. It's just what I've seen in the
Yeah.
in the space around genetic testing. So I'd love to know from your perspective, because you have so much experience, like what are some of the ways that it's applied really well, and what are some of the ways that it's not applied well? Because the
Yeah.
same thing happens with blood work, right? Here's an example. We go get blood work through our doctor. We ask them if our thyroid's okay. We ask them if our blood sugar is okay, or how's my health? And they say everything's normal.
Things
And then we look
just
at it
fine.
from then you and I look at blood work through a
And
functional
we're
lens,
like,
and it's
oh
like,
man.
oh, there's like a whole list of things for us to work on and just
Yeah.
to optimize and make it healthy. So, how are you seeing ways that genetic testing is not being used correctly? First, let's jump into that first.
So I feel so there's a couple different variables with that. So you've got people who want what I feel is the quick fix. The
Yes.
I want this test to tell me exactly what to do, and it's
We
not so
want
black and white.
simplicity, and that's fair.
Yeah,
We all want it.
yeah. And
Trust me.
I would love simplicity. Let me tell you.
Yes.
Lord help me with all of the things that we've combated over the years. Nothing has been simple, and
Right.
I think handling a tongue tie was about as simple as it got for my kid.
Oh,
Uh, but when it comes to genetics, it's one of those things where I have people come to me and they're like, "Hey, I want to do this because I want to know exactly what supplements I need to take. This
yes.
test is going to tell me, and it's going to fix everything."
Right.
Or I just need to know my MTHFR status because that's going to fix everything. Not realizing that there is a much broader scope and a much broader spectrum of information we need to look at. So, in that sense, yes, having certain genetic tendencies can push us towards needing certain supplements more than others, which ultimately it does help kind of take the guesswork out of the process. But what's really important is that the genetics is your blueprint. That's going to be with you to the day you die. From the time you're born to the time you die, those are your genes. You test one time for your genetics and that's it. And knowing that information is never going to change. But what is going to change, and this is where we come in with looking at biomarkers in these optimal labs, is that blood work. Whether it's doing a comprehensive lab panel, every 6 months to a year, whether it's doing like an organic acid test, a Dutch hormone test, those snapshots of time is actually telling us, is my body in an optimal place that is giving me really good biomarkers to go off of? For instance, for methylation and MTHFR, the biggest takeaway is looking at your homocysteine level. There are times that doing like a serum B12 or a serum like a red blood cell folate is really good as well. But homocysteine is really like the go-to to letting us know, are we methylating properly? Are our levels optimal? If your homocysteine is a 14, 16, 20, you need tons of methylation support. Versus if it's like a 6 to 8, you're in a really, really good spot. So you technically may not even need to take additional methylfolate or methyl B12s because what you're doing with your diet or your current supplements is giving you everything you need. So it's knowing that kind of little educational component of, okay, yes, I might have these genes, but my blood work and my labs are showing that it's pretty spot on. So I don't need to really change anything that I'm doing right here in the here and now. But 6 months from now, if they stop doing all the good, healthy things that they've been doing and they retest the same exact test and they're just all over the map, then it's very, very well indicated that you need to go back to what you were doing because your labs are telling you, your body's giving off these warning signs that you need to support these areas long term. So that's
Yeah.
kind of how I see it.
And
Because
I think that, like you said, pairing the genetic testing with the biomarkers like blood work, like it shouldn't be done in isolation as like the only test that's done to assess what someone needs is kind of what you're saying.
absolutely. Yes.
And so I also see that where people get genetic testing and they're like, oh, I have terrible MTHFR, I'm screwed. And we could look at their blood work and their homocysteine, for example, could be completely fine. And they're over there taking tons of folate and B12 because they were just tunnel vision on the genetics.
Yeah,
And
and
you can overmethylate. You can
absolutely.
speed it up to where that becomes dysfunctional.
You can so there in since we're on methylation, there are individuals that are very sensitive to methyl products, to the compounding methylated genetics. Like it makes you more sensitive. So people who take a methylated form of a vitamin, they tell you, oh, I'm super anxious now, I couldn't sleep, like I just felt so irritable all day. Those are telltale signs that your body is saying, whoa, slow down, this is too much for me, and
Hmm.
that this is not okay for me. So then you have to kind of take a step back and go, okay, are there other components going on, whether genetically or in labs? Like, are they super inflamed? Do they have a lot of histamine issues? Is it something that has to do with the hormones? Because there's a hormone component to this as well,
For
that
sure.
all intercedes at some point in time in our wonderful computerized body here, where we're all connected. It's all of these little electrodes going everywhere, our brains telling our body to do all these things, and it's a trickle down effect. So
Hmm.
ultimately, you can do too much, and that is sometimes people's reasoning for being like, oh, I'm throwing my hands up, I don't want to do any of this. Well, instead of taking 20 supplements, let's take it way, way, way back and figure out what you truly actually need, because you could be taking, without realizing it, tons of B12 through 5, 6 different supplements, because they tend to put B12 in almost
Yes.
everything right now. So,
Hmm.
so you can definitely do too much of a good thing. It's the same with prescriptions and medications and things like that. There are also too much of a good thing for people. Like, you don't have to basically inundate your life with all of these things, because quite honestly, we're compounded by the newest influencer saying this is the newest thing, we need to take this, we need to take that, and if you have MTHFR, this is the end all be all, not realizing there are dozens and dozens of genes that affect methylation. And that is a big takeaway, because so many people are like, well, I'll just check my MTHFR. Well, you're missing out on a ton of folate SNPs. You're missing out on genes that specifically tell us about cellular utilization, intestinal absorption. Like, there are so many other components that affect that
Well, and
methylation pathway.
I think one of the confusing parts of it too is that you can list all of these symptoms and tendencies with
Yeah,
MTHFR. And so people are like, that's me. But
yeah,
then you could do the same thing with these other sections of genetic testing, and there's a lot of overlap. And
there
so,
is.
yeah, symptom wise, I mean, so they might have the similar symptoms of MTHFR, but actually be, totally fine in that section. But really, it's another area that they need to support. So, if
Yeah,
you wouldn't mind kind of sharing, kind of a genetic report,
yeah.
different sections, like what are the ones that
So
you
I'll,
want
I'll
to highlight?
definitely share some of my favorite sections of the report,
Yes, please.
because I feel like sometimes these are quite overlooked. Let's see, and should be sharing in just a moment. Go. Hopefully everybody can see
Yeah.
that. And
Yep.
I'll be happy to share, a sample report with you, Rebecca. So any of your clients that tune in, if they want to kind of look over it and
Mm-hmm.
see one for themselves, I'm happy to share that. So to give a little bit of foreground on the report itself. So we're looking at a sample for our works panel. Our works panel looks at a little over 200 SNPs, and that ranges anywhere from things related to nutrition, environmental toxins, to, like this page's, inflammation, fats. We look at histamines, methylation, hormones, brain health. There are so many different components in the report itself. We have actually compiled the design to be essentially in 3 different sections. So we're looking at the foundational section here. There are some preceding pages, but inflammation is one of my favorite things to talk about, because I am personally have a lot of inflammation and deal with it often. Um, But this goes all the way back to different components like lifestyle, sleep tendencies, weight loss and sleep. If somebody's dealing with smoking issues, there are genes that can affect how somebody can quit or they can process that ability to quit. Um, there are some people who have genes that increase your risk of apnea. It's not just because of a small airway. There's actually some genetics. One of my, and this is a little bit cut off because there's so many things in here. One of my really favorite things, and we beta tested this section a few times with different people within our staff. Um, and when we did my youngest son's, who is very specific in how he learns, everything that it came up with was spot on with how he's learned. And we homeschool, so I'm able to see
So
these.
you're very involved in that learning process, and so
Yes,
you knew this was legit.
I read it the first time and I was like, there is no way that those genetics and that algorithm pulled all of that information. So I had our founder run it again and it was spot on every single time. And I was like, okay, I that's exciting. So this is really helpful for spectrum kiddos, ADHD, even for the adults. Like even the adults feel like they can't learn certain ways. Like we've had some feedback from certain adults that they're like, knowing this and seeing it in writing really validated how I was, functioning day to day. Like it made so much more sense. I didn't feel like I was crazy because I needed certain things to.
Yeah, I love that. And then they can stop trying to force themselves into a round hole, being a square peg. And it's not that like there's anything wrong with how they learn. It's just we're not all cookie cutter people.
No,
And we don't all need to learn the same way. But at
exactly.
least understanding how you function the best and the best way to
Absolutely.
speed up the efficiency of learning, like that's so helpful for
Yeah,
anyone.
and just to take that kind of to another level too is that there you can have Jane and Sue have very similar genetics just because that's what mom and dad gave them, and they could not even be related, but because how each of them live, eat, move, what kind of environment they have in their day to day, what their stress levels are, if either one has any chronic illnesses, all of that can change how our genetics present. So
Mhm.
there are so many different variables because I've even had that be like, oh well, my friend took the test and some of this information looks like it's the same, but she has these symptoms, I don't. So why don't I have those symptoms if we have similar genetics? And it's all in our environment and what we're doing and how we're supporting ourselves at the end of the day on what
Which
we
is so
actually need.
empowering because then it's like, you know, yes, there's some things out of our control, but there are some things in our control, thank goodness, that like, hey, we don't have to be stuck with
Yeah.
these problems. So, yeah.
Exactly. So what I like about the report, like I said, it goes through in some foundational sections. I know GLP-1s are a huge topic, just as much as methylation lately. Um,
Yeah.
so we do incorporate some of this information here uh,
Wow.
in the dietary page because there are some that are ready to do it. They want to do it because they have all of these health issues that their doctors are saying this is going to help you,
Yeah.
and then they turn around and go, well, I've only lost 5 pounds in 3 months, but Jane Smith over there has lost 25. Like what is the deal? Why is this not working for me? And I'm following
Mm-hmm.
everything to a T. And it's
Mm-hmm.
because there are some genetic factors that do reduce our responses to GLP-1 medications. So
Interesting.
there are some people that it's not the best option. So there are natural alternatives like berberine. Berberine is an amazing supplement, and that's something that can be cycled on and off. I take it whether I'm eating a heavy carb meal or if I notice some fluctuations, like I wore a CGM for 3 months not too long ago. And I really found that if I cut down on my proteins, my blood sugars fluctuated immensely. And, when I did do a higher carb meal, when I integrated berberine, it helped bring that response down. So there are things that you learn about your body, knowing some of your genetics, that you end up, incorporating it into different aspects of your life. And you feel really empowered when you know that. So with that, obviously we have a fats page. We're looking at some cholesterol because again, genetics can kind of turn the tide on how our bodies process the fats. again, cholesterol is one of those topics that, I think common allopathic medicine is taken to like an extreme. And many years ago, having a total cholesterol 300 wasn't unheard of. That was normal. And as health has shifted over the decades, the lab values have shifted as well. And that's what I think a lot of people don't understand is that some of these lab values are starting to increase or lower as our community as a whole become sicker. So we have to kind of adjust to that, and knowing that we have some power in how we approach some of these issues. Um, Inflammation page, you'll see on these reports that we list a lot of times a lot of education, for the simple fact that giving that education and that information to individuals is key. So we're looking at things that are typically related to chronic inflammation. These can be any kind of these type of disorders can stem from our chronic inflammatory response, which most people in the functional space are very well aware of this, just not quite sure how to combat it sometimes. We do list some anti-inflammatory foods, which is great for those trying to adjust their diet. Pro-inflammatory foods. So this is I love kind of the key of like, here's some good, here's some bad. So that way people can take that and run with it and understand, well, if I'm going to go eat, a bunch of fried food at the restaurant with my friends on Friday night, I'm probably not going to feel too great because that's going to increase some of my inflammation automatically. Um,
Yeah, I really appreciate how straightforward the report is because some of the genetic testing is just literally listing like positive or negative or,
yeah.
green or red and all these different codes. And you're like, what
Like,
am
I
I
don't
even looking
understand
at?
any of it.
What does this
I mean,
mean?
I mean, I've worked in the field for 8 years, and it still baffles me sometimes when I look at other reports, and I'm like, this is just a mess. Like, I don't understand how somebody is supposed to make sense of some of this information because it's not clear cut. So, what we have really tried to do with our testing is give a ton of educational information, list out some initial recommendations. So like on this page, like here's some inflammation related, labs that you can order or have your doctor order,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
your health coach can help you get these ordered. These are really good indicators of, is your body inflamed? Is there something that, say your genes look great and you don't have those predetermined tendencies, but you take those labs and your labs are sky high, then what is happening or what has gone on? And here we have these other causes: lack of sleep, exercise, overtraining. So those that are really like into their CrossFit 7 days a week and they've got loads of oxidative stress because of it, they could be
Mm-hmm.
causing some unnecessary inflammation, gut health, infection, food sensitivity. Like there's so many variables that can also offset these
Yeah.
labs if there's no genetics present.
Yeah. I think that's so helpful to put it all in one place for the
Yeah,
client to really think through all the factors instead of just the genetics. I think that's
yeah.
really smart.
Yeah, and that's one thing that we tried to take away with this information. Same with something like the histamine. Histamine's such a huge topic, especially, I feel like,
Wow, you guys fit a lot on this page.
yeah,
Holy
there's
cow.
there's probably more that we could have fit, but it was lengthy, so we tried to consolidate it some. Um,
Wow.
the wonderful thing about being a woman is
What else? Because it's such a long list of wonderful
it
things.
really is. And I'm in that camp right now of perimenopause, menopause. I only have one
Yeah.
ovary. So I've been dealing with what I thought was hormonal issues for what I feel like 2, 3 years, which actually turned out more to be histamine related issues because of the roller coaster of what little hormones I have left at this point.
I've
Um,
seen that so much. It's what I'm telling ladies is that it's like when you go into that perimenopause and everything, it's not so much the hormones, but it's like the buffer that they were for you for so long. in helping you not feel
Yeah,
the inflammation, not feel the histamine.
yeah,
And now that little guard border around you with the
yeah.
hormones is
The,
gone.
the, the buckets are offset now as we age, and that's why,
Whew,
it was really important for us to put these female histamine levels here, because there are certain areas of a woman's cycle and a woman's life that
yes,
you can have an increase just automatically, just an automatic
yes.
increase of histamine response, even without a genetic predisposition. So
And wouldn't you know that during pregnancy it's decreased,
yeah,
and that's when so many people, so many women with autoimmune inflammatory conditions feel better.
I've been a chronic migraine sufferer since the age of 9, which got worse every time I had a cycle. So I'd have a hormonal migraine kind of attack. When I was pregnant, it all disappeared. And now I know that when I do suffer from a migraine or I feel the migraine coming on, it's because I've increased a histamine based food. Like I've had too much of it, or I'm having exposures to histamine because it's all histamine driven. It's not, natural or holistic, but when I feel a really bad one coming on, I'll pop a Benadryl and I'll pop a Motrin, and within a few hours it's gone. And it's more so
That's
because
something that I try to stress to women because they're so convinced. They're like, it's like goes in one ear out the other when I tell them like, hey, histamine is a thing with our cycle because all they can think about is their hormones. So all they want to do is a Dutch test, which doesn't tell me really anything about how to help them with their histamine. So I'm
yeah,
like, hey, we could spend all the money on the hormone testing, but if it's migraines timing with your hormones,
yeah,
most likely it's inflammation and histamine, and we need to look into your
absolutely.
gut and some other things
Yeah,
that would play into that. So yeah, no, I
absolutely.
think
So
I
it,
love that you're bringing this up.
yeah, and that's why I wanted to touch on it, because there's a ton of information in this report, but this is something that I think gets overlooked pretty often. Is
Oh yeah.
because, as women going to traditional doctors, we're told we're crazy. It's hormones. Let's get on hormone replacement. Let's do this. Let's
Birth
do that.
control.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
it's a constant cycle of not really being heard, because these symptoms, that there's some high histamine symptoms like the anxiety, the migraines, nasal congestion, adrenal fatigue, but throw in the bucket of brain fog, dizziness, lightheadedness, nausea, like digestive issues. All of
Hmm.
that can be histamine related,
Hmm.
and it can increase at certain times. And I think that's why some people just, they're so convinced it's just the hormones. It's kind of that, it's just methylation, it's just MTHR, but it's not. It's this huge component of a broader picture that really affects these areas. So, putting in some type of histamine support, there's some great products out there that are related to histamine support. I use one called Histamine Scavenger. If I know that I'm
That's a
having,
good one.
yeah, I love it. If I'm really having a flare up, I'll throw that in. There's some other that's like mast cell, support, which
Hmm.
I don't have mast cell issues, but when it's a really big histamine flare, I find
Hmm.
adding that in during that time period. And this is not necessarily something I'm taking every day of the year. This
Yeah.
is, as I need it essentially.
Nice.
So, high histamine foods, you can remove those for a while and see if that's related to the foods. That could be a food sensitivity issue. And that leads to, oh, maybe I really do have leaky gut going on, and that's why these symptoms are compiling. So again,
Hmm.
it's a crazy rabbit hole, of all of these things. But specifically to genetics, I mean, we're looking at certain areas that control some of the food-based histamine. So if somebody has an enzyme reduction in DAO, they're going to need support regardless of anything else that they do, especially if they're not wanting to go on a super restrictive diet. They can add a DAO enzyme into their meals, especially their higher histamine based meals, if they don't want to restrict themselves, and see if that changes some of the symptomology that they are experiencing or have experienced in the past. Um,
Hmm.
HNMT, that gene is more of, think like asthma, hay fever, things like that, the seasonal allergies. Sometimes when you have a predisposition to that area, that can also increase reactions with certain foods, because foods are from plants. It's the same kind of concept. Like certain essential oils can cause issues for individuals because they're sensitive to the plants that they stem from. So it's one of those things where you have to kind of look at it in a broader scope, and not such a tunnel vision approach because of how much other areas can affect these things.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. So that will say takes me to leaky gut. Um, the whole gluten issue for many, gluten, dairy. When we're looking at this, we also love to put in, are there genes related to GI barrier integrity? And there absolutely is. So if someone has some genes related to this, they have a higher tendency to really fall into that, um, you know, what I call the GI related autoimmune concerns, IBS, IBD, Crohn's, things like that. There are some genetics that make us more susceptible to it. So, really understanding if we have some type of gluten sensitivity, plus we have GI barrier integrity issues, you probably just want to go 100% gluten free. Take it out, don't look back, because at this point you've got genes that are telling you here's your warning sign, like if you remove this you're likely going to feel better. It may take some time, it does take some people time, to kind of see the differences with some of the symptoms related. I'm a big fan of taking dairy out as well. Dairy and gluten carry some very similar proteins, so if you take gluten out and you're still doing dairy, you may still have the same symptoms because of those similar proteins that are present.
Mm-hmm.
So you can do an elimination for a while of the dairy. I know some people who can do raw dairy with no issue, and they don't have any symptoms related to what they had before. So that could be an option. Um, let's see. Have we had any questions or anything come in that?
No, I've been
Oh, okay.
keeping an eye on it. Yeah, I will
Okay,
let you know if anything pops
good.
up.
Of course, this is a lot of information, so it's probably like mind blowing for some people to see it broken down in a certain way. With this test, and now mind you, all of these pages are still in the foundational section. These are all.
Whoa.
This is all foundational. These are things that we need to be looking at first and foremost before jumping into methylation and hormones and brain health and all of these other areas that we look at.
That's great. I think
Yeah,
that's great. We're talking about diet, we're talking about sleep, we're talking about caffeine, like all of these like foundational lifestyle things first.
yeah, and
Because
that's
because
key.
it's hard for us to fix like those niche issues
Yeah,
if we're overlooking those daily choices that we're
absolutely.
doing every single day. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what I'll do just for fun, I'll jump to some of the heavier hitting stuff because I know we're on limited time. But like here's the toxic exposure page that I talked about. Here's that butadiene and benzene. So that butadiene is what off gases on rubber playgrounds, which schools our kids are playing on. We may be running track on them at some parks if they have them. So we're getting exposures in our environment. To keep that in mind. Our core section, and I'll kind of just touch on a couple of things here. This is where we're getting into some of the heavier support areas like glutathione and antioxidant, um, our superoxide, our SOD pathways. I mean, this is huge for oxidative stress and inflammation.
Hmm.
So if we have, genetic components and variants in these areas that make us, to be a little bit lower in glutathione, we don't have that antioxidant defense. Our SOD pathways will increase, our inflammatory responses if there are variants here. There's so many variables. And again, we still haven't even gotten to methylation at this point in time in the report. So this is kind of helping kind of clue people in about, the processes with the body. Uh,
Yeah.
Core nutrients. Most tests, if you are doing a test with other companies, may look at just one variant within vitamin D. With ours, we're looking at three different areas. We're looking at receptors, we're looking at transport, and we're looking at the activation or the cellular utilization in it, which can impact our vitamin D levels in a huge way. So we're looking at those three different variables. That's huge for immune health, brain health, huge for women with, perimenopause, menopausal issues. Like all of these things are so supportive in all.
Anyone with an inflammation
It,
issue.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So as we get into it, we're looking at some other core nutrients, vitamin E, C, B6, Phosphatidylcholine, I feel, is very underutilized in the functional world. I think it's becoming more and more of a common supplement. I don't think I've come across anybody that couldn't benefit from a little bit of it. Whether we get it through food or if we're supplementing as well. It's huge for brain health. I find that it's very, very beneficial for kids on the spectrum, ADHD, women, especially with the brain fog and the kind of the cognition issues that kind of play a part. Sometimes supplementing and supporting with choline can make a difference for a lot of women.
Nice.
If there are a lot of methylation issues and they're having a really hard time supporting methylation through methylfolates and B12s, choline can actually take some of that load off. So there is a connection with phosphatidylcholine and methylation support. So we do include that information here as kind of a caveat, like just a little note that this may benefit you. So that's always a huge thing.
Nice.
Then, of course, methylation. I'm sure we could probably do like 2 hours over this test of talking about all these things. But some kind of key areas that I do want to promote here is that we're looking at 3 different variants in MTHFR. Most companies are only looking at 2, same with blood work. So that's typically what I see is that most people are like, oh, I got labs done and it told me I had, MTHFR 677. Great, that's fantastic. Well, what about some of the other areas? So when I say other areas, we have certain individuals, like I mentioned earlier, that may have some sensitivity to methylated vitamins in that form. There are genetics that play a part in that. There are other genes that compound the folates, so it can make it worse or it could be supportive. So there are some other genes there. The cellular utilization. Is your body able to move those folates into the cell and utilize it appropriately? If
Mm-hmm.
there are some hiccups and hindrances in this area genetically, then it's a lot harder for people to really be able to utilize those nutrients.
I think I had that come up on a
Mhm.
genetic test where they were like, you have a problem with like either the carrier, like the key to get in
Yep.
the cell or whatever. That's how it was
Yeah.
explained to me. And
Yeah.
so they were
And
like,
that's sometimes more of an issue than MTHFR itself. It's what is the body doing in the pathway, because I've had results where there are no variants in MTHFR itself, but everywhere else there was something. There was something
hmm,
that hindered the pathway, but yet their
wow,
MTHFR alone was fine. So if they had gone and gotten just a normal blood lab from LabCorp,
right,
they would have never known some of these other
right.
areas that were actually the issue.
Okay. That's really good information to know and to realize that even if you got that done through your doctor, you may have been told it was fine when there's many other pieces that are
Absolutely.
really struggling.
Yeah. And so
And
to
so for me, if I were to go off of my blood work and see that my folate's in the normal range, from your perspective, would it be better for me to be on the higher end of folate range or like
um
how would you navigate that?
I think depending on symptoms, depending on any other like health considerations, because all of our B vitamins are water soluble. What we don't need, we're going to pee out. That's just the bottom line. Can you absolutely do too much too quickly? Absolutely. That's why people feel jittery or anxious or irritable, especially if they go get like an IV and they push extra B12. I always
I
have.
had a friend who got an IV and she felt horrible.
Yes.
And I was thinking,
Yeah.
you need some genetic testing done because why
Yeah.
did you feel terrible after what everyone else feels
Yeah.
good off of?
Yeah, that would make me question something. It's like, what else did they put in there and how much of it? Like, how much did they
Yeah.
push in that short amount of time? So yeah, I think there's those variables that we have to work with where somebody's normal, maybe mid-range on the lower end, even if they're supplementing, they feel great, they're doing all the right things, but their normal may just be in that mid to lower range. Whereas
Okay.
somebody who feels horrible all the time and they keep staying in that range, that's where, is it something that, they're not absorbing it intestinally? Like, are they taking capsules and it's just not
True.
getting anywhere? Do they need a liposomal form? will they need to go and find a practitioner that can offer, injectable? Or do they need to have, an IV drip so it can bypass the gut completely and go directly into the bloodstream? Like there's so many variables with that that I take a little bit of a different approach than I think than most do. Is like, let's look at the picture, let's see what the symptom, because if somebody feels great but they're on the little bit of a lower end of a B, vitamin, whether 12 or folate, but they feel good, then I feel like that's just their normal. So I would just have them continue supporting the way that they are. If those symptoms change or if they feel differently in 3 months, 6 months, and we see labs that have just plummeted, then we know something else is probably going on at that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Makes
But yeah,
sense.
so I'll just kind of close it out because we do, like, there's a whole hormone page, works really great with Dutch because I know you have a lot of clients that come in and do Dutch. This page is
Yeah.
great for the
Genetics
genetic
are
component.
so helpful. Yeah.
So amazing. We actually worked briefly with Precision Analytical with their clinicians to kind of par for the course, kind of like bounce ideas off of what our testing was looking at versus what Dutch was
Wow.
looking at.
That's really cool.
So we were able to collaborate with them on that area. We look at some neurotransmitter information. Again, this can also, like COMT, can
This
also
is
affect
huge
mental
for
function.
people with anxiety, right?
Oh, huge, huge.
Yeah.
So this will give you kind of another, outlook to kind of know what's going on. Do I have a slower
Or
form of depression?
insomnia. Yeah.
Yes, it's a
Heart
huge component.
palpitations.
We
Yeah.
look at a lot of dopamine receptor information. We look at MAOA, some support of MAOB. So we're looking at that as far as neurotransmitters as well. We incorporate oxytocin and BDNF, which is huge for brain health and mood. So we incorporate that. But just to touch and kind of close out, the wonderful, scary APOE. So that's what scares everybody. But what we try to highlight here is the most common, the most general ideal result is E3, E3. That's what we want to see. Not always the case for everyone, but that doesn't mean, like I said, it's about being proactive with the information rather than reactive. When you tend to see somebody with like an E2 option, you're probably seeing somebody that metabolically has a lot of issues going on, like insulin resistance, diabetes, weight issues, maybe even some cardiovascular concerns like high blood pressure. When you see E4, that's the scariest one for everybody because they think that's it. That's it. I'm going to get it. That's not always the case. So I know individuals that are really really like determined that they're not going to develop it. They're taking really good care of their health. They're doing their prevention. They're really taking it a step beyond, and they're taking this information to know, I know what kind of diet I need to be on. I need to make sure that I can detox, keep my environment clean. And we pulled from research an E4 supplementation protocol. Now, this here is definitely a recommendation from PubMed. Obviously, we want people to work with their practitioners to make sure it is ideal for what they need. But this is giving people some insight of what would I take in this situation, and do I already take some of this? And it's likely most people are already taking some of this support if they've been on this journey for a while. But there are also genes that can cause a little bit more, issues with this. So that's just giving them more insight and more education of what to support and what to be proactive about. It doesn't have to be a scary situation. Like we were talking about earlier, it's more giving them those puzzle pieces to really optimize their health at the end of the day.
So does this group the patient's genetics in this little chart here, like the BDNF and the SOD1 and all that?
Yeah, so this is pulling some of the other genes that we look at that actually influence or can cause maybe further.
It's nice you can see it kind of grouped together like that.
Yeah, so this is huge. This has been really helpful for some of the practitioners that we work with, knowing that there are other genes that can influence APOE, and that gives them a little bit more, of an arsenal of things that they can do ultimately to support that individual.
Nice.
So yeah, so
Man,
I'm
we're
sure,
not even, we're on page 22 of 34. So
yeah, there's a
obviously we don't have enough time to go through the whole report, but I do feel like you answered so many important questions around genetic testing, how to do it well, how not to do it, the point of it, being proactive, and kind of how it can really optimize things in a different way. Like there's value in all these different types of tests,
absolutely,
but I do feel like there's a unique value with genetic testing. And one of the things that I really like about it is the fact that it is a blueprint and it is set.
yeah,
And that's one of the beautiful things about it because so many other labs, it is kind of like a struggle to do the
yeah.
test. And then we do a protocol, and then it's like, now we have to retest and
We
see
have to
where things have
retest, and yeah,
shifted and
yeah,
test again and test again. And so at least with this one, it's so thorough and it's so educational. And I just want to give you guys props for like even listing out like dosages as an
yeah,
example for supplements on here because a lot of companies would probably be too scared to do that. But
yeah.
at the same time, I appreciate it because I see how people will look at a list of things and you're like, "Oh, I take that. I take that. I take
Yeah.
that." And they're
And they may
taking
be
like a
taking like a
fraction,
minute amount of
a
something.
tiny amount of what they need,
Yeah,
So I'll look at like a multivitamin and they're getting like 5 micrograms of selenium, and they're like, "Yeah, I've got some." I'm like, "That's
not
nothing,"
enough.
So
Yeah,
anyway, it's really cool to see all this information on here. And how
absolutely.
would someone, obviously, they could get this test done through a practitioner like myself or through Ashley, who works with us. But any more information on, I guess it's just to explain, it's a super
Yeah,
easy test, like we mentioned at the beginning, just a cheek swab to get some spit on a little Q-tip, basically,
basically,
and you
yeah.
ship it off, and it's one of the easiest tests you can
It
possibly.
really is. I mean, we have clients and customers doing it on newborns, just hours old, just so that way they can get that information right away.
Yeah, that's gonna
You
be
know,
me with
yeah.
my if I have a baby, I'm gonna be
Pop the
all right,
baby
let's
out,
test it.
I'm good to go. So yeah, it's a super easy cheek swab. Obviously, I hugely encourage that individuals get it through their practitioners. So definitely, if anybody that you work with, any of your clients want to get the testing done, I'd encourage them to come directly to you. You already know their information, you know their background, so it'd be really easy for you to take a look at something like this, knowing their history, to get the right things plugged in and adjusted for them ultimately. Um,
Yeah,
they can order it on the website as well. Typically, those are for consumers that haven't partnered with a practitioner yet. But our company has worked really hard at building a huge practitioner community. So we're always sending referrals to consumers that reach out to us that need to get partnered with a practitioner. Because at the end of the day, we're a community. We want everybody to thrive and be really healthy. But like I said, it's cheek swab, super easy. Once our lab does have it in hand, turnaround time is about 7 days. So it's
which
a
is
really,
amazing.
which is quick. And like I was telling you earlier, Rebecca, before we jumped on, our entire company is 100% in-house. Chain of custody from start to finish is all internal. There are no third parties. There are no third party labs. We own our machines. The genesis is on staff. Quality control is huge with us. Privacy is huge with us. I couldn't tell you how many SpongeBob's and Britney Spears we have in our system for that have turned in samples because nobody wants to give their name sometimes.
So
So
you can submit the cheek swab with like an alias
yeah,
name if you don't want your genetic results to be ever compromised,
yeah. I mean
which
that.
obviously you guys are doing
Oh yeah.
everything you possibly can to protect it.
Yeah, and we are, we're a very small, kind of family owned isk type company. So we have a very small staff on staff day to day. There are only a couple of us that actually have access to everything from the back end forward. So that's a very small subset of us. So that's like the founder, me, and maybe one other person essentially. So, if there is any ever doubt, with anything, everybody is always welcome to write in and just say, hey, is this really secure? What are you going to do if get sold or bought? Our founder probably would throw up his hands and be like, just not worth it, because he created as a practicing clinician for the privacy, for the information that needed to be put out there. So he has his ethical values behind it as well. And I don't ever see our, at least our company being in that position, because it's just not going to be a possibility for him. So, you know, at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, you know, we're really secure. Like that, we've got practitioners that send in just like initials and a client number. Like we don't know the client's information. If they don't tell us like, hey, it's for this client,
Yeah.
we're like, I
Yeah.
don't know what to tell you. Like I
And
need
I do
more
appreciate that
information.
because I have some clients that are like, I don't want to include my name. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, we'll see if like
It,
our these labs will even accept it.
yeah, I
So
mean, then we accept it with like initials. We accept it, and like I said, one of our practitioners does like a client ID, which is like a couple initials that probably don't even like reflect the individual's name, and then like a number. So that's how we identify the sample for them. And the other caveat too is the demographic information for the samples never goes to the lab. All the lab ever gets is the sample ID and the sample. That's it. That's all they get. They don't ever see the demographics. They don't see the requisition forms that come in. Those are two totally separate, you know, areas and departments. The lab is actually located in the Houston area. Home office is in Nashville, but we all work very, you know, very well together. So that way, thankfully, I'm right outside of Houston. So if I ever have to run to the lab for anything, I have direct contact with them. So
yeah,
it's runs like a fine oiled machine these days. So
it does. I mean, turnaround in a week is impressive because
yeah,
most labs take at least 2 weeks or 3 weeks.
yeah,
So
yeah, at
well,
least.
I thank you so much for coming on today. And
Of
this was
course.
very, very helpful. I just appreciate all of your expertise and background and knowledge. And I know we could probably do a few more follow-up talks about deep dives into different
Absolutely.
things. But yeah, I love that we were able to cover so much in one kind of intro discussion about genetic testing and bring so much value. And like I said, it's you one and done. You get so much information. And I love y'all's report, how just clear it is. It's a practitioner. They can still learn so much from
Yeah.
the report. And then if there's still kind of like a more complex health situation, working with that information with the practitioner just to kind of even
Just a deep dive
further
in.
the
Yeah,
value
further.
of the test results. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think that's
And
awesome.
you know, you added me to your community, your group there on Facebook. So if anybody like after the fact has questions, I'm happy to jump in and
Yeah.
help answer those if they drop them in that group.
Thank you.
You know, I don't
I
have
appreciate that.
any issue with that. I just like to talk about it and share about it, and you know that's what I do every day with the practitioner. So it's fun to kind
That's
of shift
awesome.
a little bit and talk to actual clients and consumers in the space to kind of see and hear, you know, where their concerns and questions come from as well. So
Yeah, because you've been there.
yeah, yeah.
So that's really cool that you're able to help people in this way. It's awesome.
Well, it's been amazing. I'm glad we were able to do this. But yeah, if you guys want to do some kind of follow up later on and deep dive into something else related to it, I'm more than happy to do it again with you guys.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Let me jump over and turn off the live. I wasn't even like ready for it, but I can do that now. So thank you so much, everyone. Bye.